make coffee, make your bed, take a walk. This is how I start every day. Small wins, things I choose because they help me feel successful before I face anything hard. That's behavioral momentum. But here's the question I want you to sit with today. Are your clients choosing their momentum or are you choosing it for them? Because that difference is everything. If you're a BCBA, you've probably used behavioral momentum before. Those quick, easy requests we stack to build cooperation before asking for something harder. It's a strategy we teach, we train on, and we use all the time. Early in my career, I used this strategy frequently. And honestly, it worked. My clients transitioned more easily, sessions felt smoother, and because I prioritized connection, I felt good about using it. But then I started listening more closely to autistic adults, especially those speaking out about coercion and ABA, and suddenly something in me started to shift. And I started to wonder, am I using this strategy to support autonomy or to bypass refusal? This isn't about rejecting behavioral momentum. It's about rethinking how we use it and who it really serves. Because when we understand the ethics beneath the strategy, we can support our clients without undermining their voices. Behavioral momentum is a strategy we use in ABA to increase the chances that a person will complete a harder, less preferred task by starting with easier, high probability ones. It works like this. You start with something easy, something the person's likely to say yes to, then gradually build toward more and more challenging requests. For example, if you want a child to go from playing on the floor to lining up to leave a classroom, you might ask them to stomp their feet, do a little dance, then line up. In this example, stomping their feet might be something that they enjoy, and it's a way to get them standing rather than sitting on the floor. If you model these behaviors and have built a connection with the child, the transition is likely to be much smoother than if you simply asked a child to stop playing and line up. I used this strategy often and casually early in my career, amazed at how effective it really was. There was one little boy who really struggled with transition, and we had this fun thing that we did. I'd make a moose face with my hands and hold my fingers, fold my fingers down like an alpaca. We'd sing moose, alpaca, moose, moose, alpaca. It became our silly little ritual. I'd pop into his classroom when I was walking by just to sing the song with him. If I was sitting at my desk when he walked by my office, he'd jump in and say, Miss Amy Moose Face, and start singing the song. When I was with him and knew there was a tough transition coming, I used it as a warm up, something that led into other steps like standing up, putting toys away, and transitioning to another activity. And at the time, I felt really good about it. He was laughing, we were connecting, and the transitions went more smoothly. It was easy and everyone was happy. Everyone got what they wanted, right? But then I started listening more closely to autistic adults, especially those talking about their experiences of coercion and ABA. And that's when I started to doubt myself. That's when I started to ask harder questions. Not just did it work, but did they choose it? That boy didn't consent to the transition, he consented to the play. And I started wondering if I was unintentionally using our connection to guide him toward something he didn't have a real choice about. Connection, cooperation does not equal consent. That's the tension I want to explore with you in this video, because behavioral momentum isn't inherently coercive, but it can become coercive if we're not deeply tuned into the choice, consent, or assent, and the individual's autonomy. So let's take some time to think about why this strategy, even when used with kindness, can feel coercive. I want to be clear. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I use this intervention all the time. We were taught that this was good ABA, and it can be effective, but effective doesn't always mean ethical, and ethical doesn't always mean easy. We're working with children. often children who need support navigating a world that isn't designed for them. And yes, part of our job is to guide them, to help them build skills that keep them safe and supported. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking the hard questions about how we do that and at what cost. Let's take a minute to think about the illusion of consent, or even assent. You give a few easy tasks. The learner says yes. They're smiling, succeeding, engaged. Then you give a harder task and they do it. But here's the question. Did they actually say yes to the hard task? Or did they say yes to the pattern, to the pressure they felt? Especially with young children or learners with limited communication, this can be hard to tell. We might interpret doing as willing, and they're not the same thing. And if we're not careful, we might mistake participation for permission. There's an ethical blind spot when using behavioral momentum. Behavioral momentum is often recommended because it helps kids comply. It gets the job done, but that's also where the ethical blind spot lives. Compliance isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it's necessary. It can keep kids safe. It teaches kids about laws. But if our methods prioritize compliance over autonomy, we start reinforcing something more dangerous. The idea that saying yes is always expected. And this is where society's expectations start to creep in. We live in a culture where children, especially in schools, are often expected to do what they're told, even when they don't want to, even when it doesn't make sense to them. And as behavior analysts, we're trained to help kids adapt to that environment. Let's take a simple example of lining up after recess. A teacher says, okay, everyone, let's line up. And 25 kids stop what they're doing and head for the door. No negotiation, no explanation, just an automatic expectation that you stop having fun and comply with what the teacher says. That's school culture. That's what we've been teaching kids to do. But what if one child doesn't? What if they're in the middle of a game or they're not ready to stop? Maybe they need a few extra seconds to process what was said, or they're overwhelmed by the sudden change. In most classrooms, the expectation isn't to support that child's process. The expectation is you line up now, because that's what everyone else is doing. That's what's been asked. That's what's appropriate. And that's what's needed for one adult to manage 25 kids. But autistic children are already asked to mask, to conform, to suppress their instincts. If we're not careful, behavioral momentum becomes another layer of that pressure, not because we're trying to harm them, but because we've been taught to value outcomes over experience. Now, let's talk about the social pressure loop that's built into this strategy. You say yes 3 times and you're on a roll. And then comes the hard ask. Even as adults, we feel the pull to keep going. That's social momentum and it's real. But our learners, especially autistic kids, often struggle with social dynamics. They might not feel comfortable saying no once that momentum starts. And if that's the case, then what looks like progress might actually be performance. We call it momentum, but to them, it could feel like an obligation. And this is where the potential for harm comes in. Let's remember that connection does not equal consent. This one is a tender one for me and probably for you too, because we care deeply about our clients. We build beautiful relationships. We laugh together. We connect. And it's easy to believe that means that we're aligned. But connection and consent are not the same thing. I used to believe that if a child was laughing and playing, then they were saying yes. But after listening to autistic adults speak about their experiences, about masking, about feeling pressure to please their therapists, about doing things that they didn't want to do just to follow along or be liked, something in me changed. So now I ask myself, even if they're smiling, did they actually want what came next? This isn't about guilt, it's about growth. And if we can pause long enough to ask these questions, we can use behavioral momentum with a level of clarity, care, and respect that honors the person in front of us, not just one task that we want them to complete. Think about how you would feel if placed in a situation like the one that we've described, where there's pressure to agree to something we might not want. Imagine walking into a car dealership. How many of you already feel a slight tug thinking you don't want to deal with the salesperson who you know will be walking up to you? You go to the dealership and you're just browsing. Maybe you're not even ready to buy yet. But before you've even had a chance to look at the sticker on the side of your first car, the salesperson is walking up to you with a big warm smile. They start with easy questions, ones that you'd obviously agree with. You're looking for something safe, right? You want good gas mileage, don't you? You're looking to feel good behind the wheel of a car, huh? You nod along, of course. Who wouldn't say yes to that? Then they walk you to a car. Maybe it's not the one you were first eyeing. Maybe it's something flashier, probably a lot more expensive. It's fine. It's not really your style, not quite in your budget, but the salesperson is excited now. They've got the keys in hand. You've already agreed to three things. You're saying yes, yes, yes. Now everyone's watching. You're handed the keys. Another car salesman walks by and says, "Oh, that model's been flying off the lot. You're going to love it." Everyone does. You feel a little trapped. You didn't ask to test drive this car. You didn't say you were ready, but suddenly it feels awkward to say no. That's behavioral momentum in action. The series of yeses, the rhythm, the social agreement, it works. That's why it's used. But when the person on the other end didn't know what they were agreeing to, when the final ask wasn't clearly offered as a choice, it doesn't matter how friendly or gentle it feels, it's still coercive. And when the person is a child or someone with limited communication or someone who deeply trusts you, that power imbalance matters even more. The car salesman wasn't yelling. They weren't threatening you. They were just using momentum, but you still walked away wondering, was that really my choice? So now that we've unpacked where this strategy can cross the line into coercion, let's talk about how we can still use it, but in ways that honor autonomy, choice, and collaboration. Here's the thing. I use behavioral momentum every day. I start my mornings with easy wins. I drink some coffee, I make my bed, I take a walk, and by the time I sit down to work, I've already built momentum. I feel successful. I feel ready. But here's the difference. I choose it. No one handed me this routine. No one told me what steps to take or when to take them. This was my own way of getting going, of feeling capable. That choice, that ownership is what makes it ethical. So, how do we bring the same sense of self-direction into our work with the learners? How do we make behavioral momentum something we offer, not something that we use? If you're working with a learner who can have conversations, you can start by offering this strategy as a tool, something that they can try, modify, or even say no to. Here's one strategy that I've used before. I've said, I know transitions are hard sometimes for you. Sometimes I like to do a few quick, easy tasks before I do something that's harder. That helps me feel ready. Do you want to try that with me? If they say yes, great. You move forward together. If they say no, you honor that and maybe you revisit it another time. Either way, you're giving them voice and power. But many of us work with kids who can't have those kinds of conversations yet. But that doesn't mean that they can't give us assent or withhold it. The truth is, most of the learners we work with won't be able to give us verbal permission to use behavioral momentum. And when things are going well, when the child is laughing and smiling, completing tasks, it can feel like they're saying yes. That was exactly the case with the little boy that I worked with, the one who we did moose face. He loved it. He leaned in, he laughed. He did silly tasks right along with me. And from the outside, it looked like perfect assent. And for those tasks, it really was. He was assenting to moose face. But here's what I've realized since then. He wasn't showing any dissent, not because he was actively consenting, if that makes sense, but because the rhythm of the routine made it really hard for him to say no. The momentum did what it was designed to do. It made the next step easier. It also made it harder for him to stop. But that's the tricky part of behavioral momentum. I can make it look like the learner is choosing every step when really they're just moving with the flow. Now, what I'm trying to tell whether a learner is really on board, I slow down. I look for true signs of assent. Things like leaning in, spontaneous smiles, reaching for that next item, choosing to continue without me prompting them. But I also stay alert for quieter signs that they're not fully on board. It might be looking away, hesitating, avoiding the next step, needing me to prompt every move. If I see that, I stop. I ask again, I offer an out, I try a different approach because momentum is only ethical if they can opt out just as easily as they can opt in. Assent equals participation plus choice plus comfort. It's not about what they're doing, it's about how they're doing it. So, what does it actually look like to use behavioral momentum ethically without coercion? It starts with a shift in mindset. That final task, the thing we're building momentum toward, should be something the learner has already shown us that they're willing to do. Not in the moment necessarily, but at some point. They've said yes to it with their words, their choices, or their actions. Momentum isn't there to get assent. It's there to support their readiness for something they've already agreed to try. That difference is everything. Let me give you a simple example. A child in a clinic is getting ready to transition to the playground. The RBT asks, "Are you ready to go outside?" And the child lights up. They're smiling. Maybe they're looking at the door. There's clear assent, but transitions are sometimes difficult for this child. Moving from one activity to another, one space to another, could be really hard. So the RBT offers a few quick, playful steps first. They clap together, they do a quick spin, and then they walk to the door side by side. The destination was already chosen and agreed to. The momentum just supported the journey. So here's another example. A learner picks a matching game when creating her visual schedule. When it's time to begin, the RBT notices that there might be a little bit of hesitation. The transition from the current coloring activity to the new matching game feels hard for this learner who loves colors so much. To support her, the RBT offers 2 quick, easy tasks to help her clean up the crayons that she's been using. Let's match the colors as we put them in the box. Or they might then say, "Nice, now let's say the names of the colors together." Then they're able to move into the game that the learner had already picked. The task wasn't a surprise. It was already part of the learner's plan and something she chose to do. Behavioral momentum was simply used to build confidence and ease that transition. So here's one more example. In a classroom, a student who has shown interest in circle time but has some trouble joining the group walks towards the group who is already sitting at circle time. They pick up a sensory cushion to sit on. The teacher supports the transition with a few easy interactions. "Hey, can you give Johnny a high five? And can you hand me the singing stick that I forgot on the table over there?" After the student does both of these tasks, the teacher presents the final invitation. "Want to join us for the hello song?" The student might then nod and sit down. They've already signaled willingness to participate. Those quick wins just help them ease into a familiar chosen routine. Now, let's contrast that with a common misuse of the intervention. A therapist wants a child to clean up, but hasn't asked for or received assent. They start with a series of quick requests. Touch your nose, clap your hands, give me a high five. Then they say, now put your toys away. The cleanup wasn't consented to. It was inserted at the end of a momentum sequence without clear agreement. That's where we move from support into pressure. And that's where things start to feel coercive. Those are the types of behavioral momentum situations that I have used in the past. Ethical behavioral momentum means we're not using momentum to get a yes. We're using it to help someone feel good about a yes they've already given. And if we haven't received that yes, then we need to pause. We don't use momentum to push through, because support feels collaborative, pressure feels like control, and our clients deserve to feel that difference. If this conversation sparked something in you, if it made you pause, reflect, and think what you've been taught, then you are exactly the kind of professional we built the Master ABA Dojo for. The dojo is where we're gathering BCBAs, aspiring BCBAs, and thoughtful behavior professionals who want to grow their practice ethically, compassionately, and courageously. It's a space for deeper learning, honest reflection, and real connection with others who care as much as you do. You'll find the link to join us in the description below. I'd love to see you there. If you enjoyed this new look at behavioral momentum, I think you'll really appreciate another video I've put together where we rethink one of the most fundamental concepts in our field, the 4 functions of behavior. In that video, I walk through Sapani's 2-function model and why it might offer a clearer, more meaningful way to understand behavior. You can click here to watch that next. Thanks for being here and for being the kind of practitioner who's willing to ask the hard questions.